Good morning. My name is Michael Galoyu Jr., and I'm chair of the Stonewall Caucus. And thank you for joining us on this Saturday, May 20th. Before we start our regular meeting, we do have a special guest with us today. Her name is Sarah Mili, and I'm not even going to try the last name, known as Miss Mili. To her students, she's here to talk to us in her individual capacity about the weighted student formula. Alrighty, so take it away, Miss Mili. Or Sarah.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Stonewall Caucus, for having me today. I think it's, we know that education is critical to our community. And so I'm really excited to see that the caucus is talking about this today. So again, my name is Sarah Miliantalaffin. Please call me Millie. That's what my students call me. That's my classroom in the background at Alima Intermediate in Eva Beach, where I teach. I teach 7th and 8th grade STEM lab and computer science. And I'm also the sponsor of our campus GSA. So in the 90s, we called them Gay Straight Alliance Clubs. In the modern version, we call them Genders and Sexuality Alliance Clubs. And ours is called the Rainbow Royales, because that's our mascot at Alima. In 2020, out of 8,000 national clubs, our GSA was named GSA of the Year by GLSEN. And if it hadn't been for COVID, we would have gotten to go to New York and walk the red carpet, but we had to accept on Zoom. It was fun because I saw that come up in my Facebook memories. It's like, oh yeah, that was a cool year. So this is work that I'm really passionate about doing, especially in our public schools. So yeah, I'm here to talk about weighted student formula, which is a very complex thing. So I'm glad that the caucus is tackling this today because it's not an easy topic in Hawaii. So I've been teaching public school for 17 years. I've been teaching at Title I schools exclusively. Now, a Title I school is given extra money by the federal government because half of the students at that school live at or below the poverty line. So that's going to be important when I talk about Title I. That's what that means. When we think about that in terms of weighted student formula. So when I taught in Houston, Texas, my school was funded by property taxes paid in the community that my school was located. And where that can become an issue is that if you're in an economically disadvantaged area, there's not a lot of property taxes to draw from to fund your schools, and therefore your schools are underfunded. So in the early 2000s, Hawaii kind of changed the model they had for funding schools and moved towards the weighted student formula. And what it is supposed to do is take from a big pot of state money and equitably fund schools without relying on that property tax piece. Funding comes directly from the state, and it's supposed to, when it's called weighted student formula, there are weights for certain students that you serve. For instance, we say ELL, which means English language learner. I prefer multilingual learner because I think it's really important that kids can speak multiple languages. But because they're learning English, there's extra funds that get weightedly assigned to those students because they're going to have some extra needs at that school. If you are a student who's identified as gifted and talented, and statistically, a lot of our LGBTQ kids, when they are actually tested or assessed, identify as gifted and talented in a certain area. So those students get more weighted dollars to help them in their programming because it's going to take more teachers and more resources to kind of work with those students. Of course, students who have special education services or SPED students are also going to get allotted more dollars because we know their care is going to take more to go ahead and handle. So on paper, this is a beautiful idea. It's very different than in the rest of the country. And we see where equity was the focus. But should I just keep talking or should I ask questions? What's easier, Chair? Are we cool to keep running? Okay, because I talk a lot, y'all. So be like, Millie, stop. So when we think about these weights and where they come into play, here's what's tough. Since early in this program, we've known that the weights aren't necessarily equitable to neighbor island schools and to schools that are very rural, because this budget pays for everything from keeping the lights on to teacher salary. And when you're a rural school or when you're a school on a neighbor island, it costs more to get school supplies. It costs more to get food. It costs more to transport students. When you want to send, as a teacher, I pride myself on going to trainings and trying to keep making my practice grow by learning more. Well, if you're a neighbor island teacher, we've got to send you to Oahu mostly for training, if not to the mainland, and those are going to have extra costs. There's going to be higher needs, and so we've known, and the state has been aware. We understand that there's more funding needed for these rural schools and for these neighbor island schools, but we haven't figured out in the weights yet how to make that work. So it's a discussion, we just haven't fixed it. There's some other interesting critiques of the weighted student formula that come into play. Sometimes that money is kind of considered like a black box for principals. Okay, so if you have more English language learners, or if you have more students who need special services, they get more money. there's not always a guarantee that that money goes to serve those students directly. And this can be especially the case when we're dealing with our students who qualify for McKinney veto services. And those are going to be your students who are houseless or homeless or move between multiple homes. And I will say, as a teacher, that is also, it's really hard to track. Schools try very hard to make sure we know where our students are and where they come from, and making sure you have the right to go to school wherever you live. And if you live on the beach, you have a right to go to that school. And we need to have the services to support you. And so making sure those students get the funding they deserve and the programming they need can be tough sometimes when we put it together. So just the idea of, with the weighted student formula, we know there are some issues. And so it's how do we get them addressed? And I think one of the topics that I know myself as a teacher, again, I'm here speaking in a personal capacity, the committee that determines the weights for weighted student formula is not necessarily democratically elected or democratically created, I should say. So that means the people who serve on that weight committee really carry a lot of power in this space. And so that really matters. And I don't necessarily think the public knows about that. So I think, again, it's super important that we're talking about weighted student formula here today, just for your reference, because I think this also helps people understand what we're wrapping our heads around. So the average per pupil funding in Hawaii is about $14,600. And that's about $784 less than the national average for what we spend on students. And we know everything here costs more. So we know that even that deficiency, like under the average, says that there's probably some more funding missing that could help our students. And I think also when we think about, I told you Title I schools, right? These are schools where half of the population needs extra support because they're living below the federal poverty line. So in Hawaii, we have 258 public schools. Of our 258 public schools, 170 of them are Title I for these needs. So if we know, according to federal government metrics, that we already have these schools that need more support, we really need to make sure those weighted student formula dollars are serving the kids who are most in need. So that's my overview, I think. Chair, anything else that that you'd like to be covered or kind of explained? I know it's a heavy topic. I don't want to put you to sleep on a Saturday, but I think it's a really important one that our community understands.
No, you covered that we were already below the national average when it comes to the weighted student formula as we head into this per student spending without even adjusting for cost of living for here in the state of Hawaii, which, as people know, we have one of the highest, if not the highest, for the entire state cost of living in any other state. Our friends from LA who used to live here went to Maui for the week, and they realized what they spent from their groceries for that 1 week is what they spent for the entire month outside of San Diego. So just those.
It's huge. And I think one thing I will just mention too, and it's hard. I struggle when we say things like learning loss from COVID, but the kids returned from COVID with some difficulties. Like, and these are things we're trying to manage as a school. So as we are doing extensive tutoring programs, we're having a huge mental health crisis in our public school, not just for LGBTQ kids, but all students right now. And so this is requiring more money and more training. I am not a therapist. I go to extra training I can, so I can kind of learn about things. But teachers are going to need way more training on how to help the kids right now with the mental health crisis that we're seeing. And so it's time where these programs are invested in. And especially right now, a lot of us are still benefiting from COVID funds that the schools were given, and the understanding those COVID funds are going away. And so that makes the funding even more critical.
Does anybody else have any questions? Because I have a couple of questions, but I want to see if anybody else does. Raise your hand, or since we're a small enough group, just shout them out.
We're family. It's all good.
Okay, since I'm not hearing or seeing none, my question is, so if they lower the weighted student formula from what the 2022 to 2023 levels were, does that mean that we might be looking at larger class sizes because there might be fewer teachers?
Fewer teachers, I think, we've always struggled with the teacher shortage in Hawaii. And again, speaking in a personal capacity. And so there are still a lot of classrooms that are staffed by substitute teachers. And this might be not certified teachers, not people who are skilled in that area. Again, as a computer science teachers, we're hard to find, specialized teachers who can teach specialized things, especially when you get into like secondary math and science. And this is not a kind of class that you just want a warm body, in to take care of our students. And so, yeah, so if you're going to reduce that, you're going to see larger class sizes. And especially, we know that the ratio to student to teacher matters, especially if you have kids right now who are below level. And to be honest, and I mean, we're seeing it nationally, all students who are kind of returning from COVID are having some below level issues. So we know those students needing tutoring and support are going to need more one-on-one time with teachers. So larger class sizes is going to make that a problem.
And weighted student formula doesn't just impact the teachers, it impacts resources for the entire school. Is that correct?
So yeah, resources for any school supplies. If you notice, I know several of you like follow me on social media. I do a lot on a website called Donors Choose, where teachers, it's kind of like GoFundMe for teachers, where we can ask for supplies and the community can fund that. And that comes directly from, a lot of us don't have those classroom dollars to go ahead and spend on those things. So if my students aren't coming with pencils, I can't teach if they can't write. So I got to buy pencils, or I have to write a grant for those. And there's some little school supplies. I think a lot of people, when they think about education, we just think about, oh, back to school shopping, and you get your new folders and your new pencils and your new backpack. And well, that was a reality for some of us. That's not the reality for all my students. And we need to make sure that every kid has what they need to learn. And so that's why that formula is so important.
And staffing for like outside of the classrooms, like for your custodians and your because if I'm not mistaken, that the teacher aides are not HSTA, again, in your personal capacity. They fall under they're not actually considered what.
Yes. So yeah, our educational assistants are critical. Like, we teachers could not do our jobs without the educational assistants. So what these are, they are certified in a capacity by the state, and they either work with, for instance, like a special needs student, or in elementary, you usually have like a grade level educational assistant who's going to help kids, get to the restroom, get to the nurse, kind of move around, or help teachers with support. And those support staff are critical, and we need more of those people, not less. So I'm an elective teacher, which means, so I'm not, math, reading, science, social studies, not one of the 4 classes that they need for graduation. But electives are in a special place where we kind of keep kids coming to school, because it's the interesting topic that you get to pick, so that they'll go to their other classes. Well, in that way, I serve the entire school. So it's not unlikely that I have 4 or 5 special needs kids in one room. I could have some behavior issues. I could have some other students who need special supports. So I need another adult there, just to make sure that we're kind of keeping everybody on track. And oftentimes, because math and reading are so important, elective teachers are like, oh, you're fine. You can handle that. You can handle the larger class sizes. I have been, in my 6 years teaching in high-dose schools, I've not had a class below 30. And that 30-to-1 ratio of middle schoolers, like, that's a lot.
Yes. How does the wage formula impact like the GSAs and other clubs at schools?
Sure. So, I mean, I think, again, that pot of money that's kind of coming to the schools, it's what's hard for some people to understand too is principal discretion, and kind of like how those budget allotments are done. And as a club sponsor, I will say I do a lot of I call it singing for my supper, where I'm trying to get grant money and trying to get support for my programming so that programming can continue. I'm lucky this year that my GSA is under the umbrella of what's called Uplink programs, and Uplink are funded by after school through the state. Basically, and this is always kind of amusing to me, it's a pregnancy prevention program, which not a high risk thing with my students that I'm working with, but it's supposed to keep students interested in doing after school activities so that they're not engaging in behavior that could be an issue. So I am funded, and but so all after school like programs or clubs have to have a charter. One thing that protects GSAs, and as I've started about 7 around the state in different places, and as you start a GSA to protect your organization and your kids, you can really rely on the school board policy of like student choice in clubs. So if students come to me, like literally kids knocked on my door and was like, hey, miss, I see this rainbow sticker on your door. Will you be our faculty sponsor for the GSA? And I was like, sure. Like, what do we have to do? So if you turn in your state paperwork, which includes a club charter, so what you're going to do and the rules that the kids have to follow in club, and that's sent into the principal and to the student government coordinator, that protects you, because the way the state says students are allowed their own association and after school hours in honoring of student voice. So the idea that they can have that on campus. And I think a lot of people are afraid of organizing a club and they don't know that. So it just, if you have friends or people wanting to start GSAs, that when it's student driven, it's protected, and in that way. But yeah, the funding just it deals with all of that. So like I will say, as Uplink, I'm allowed a small stipend for working a few hours. And so usually when I run a club, I'm not compensated. And I will tell you, our GSA babies, when they come to hang out with me, they call themselves that are gaybies, like baby gays. But then when they come to club, they're hungry. So they're going to want to eat, and that can get expensive. They're going to want, we're going to do some art. We're going to do some different activities. And those are things that are not going to come into regular school supply funds. So if it's not club funding or not allotted, a lot of teachers like me pay for that stuff ourselves.
And if you're overstressed at a size of the class, you're going to have less teachers available that are willing to step up to be faculty sponsors.
Well, that, and I will say, and just being honest with the political climate in EVA, with some things that have happened in the EVA community, I'm used to having a teacher or two who's willing to substitute. Like maybe I need to go to the doctor, maybe, and I don't want to miss a club meeting, because if I'm not there to watch the kids, they don't get their safe space. Mm-hmm. So I'm wanting to have an adult who can step in and be that club monitor, but people don't want to be identified with that because they're afraid of being a political target for what's been happening, at least on the West Side.
And that's one of the reasons that we'll be discussing something later in our actual meeting. So yeah. So yeah. And so we figured that this was one of the ways that we could actually address it without drawing more attention to certain people. So anyways.
Yeah, and that's important too.
Yeah. So any other questions? Does anybody have any other questions for Miss Mili regarding the ways student formula?
And it could be about GSAs too. Like if you have any teachers that are interested or any friends, like please share my contact information. Chair can share that with you. And I'm always glad that I jumped on a Zoom with IO Intermediate on Maui and helped them get set up. I just think I wish the state prioritized creating these clubs and safe spaces. And we're pushing for it. But right now it's really like teacher to teacher to kind of keep these groups organized. And they're so important for kids.
Okay. And you said something about looking for funding with your, what was that called again?
Oh, so like a lot of teachers like me use a website called Donors Choose, which is like GoFundMe for teachers. I don't have anything posted, but typically I'll write one in the fall and spring for snacks, and I could just call it like Rainbow Fuel for Rainbow students, just to kind of make sure that they're not hungry so they can kind of hang out in club and have fun. And these are things that we think about. It's funny with the rules on state, buying food is tough. So even though it's after school, so some of that funding, the fundraise funding can go towards like snacks, because you have to be careful about following health guidelines as well. And so but the kids want their Takis, like they don't really want carrot sticks after school, and so that can get complicated.
What, they don't want veggies, they want chips? Okay. Yes. So people can donate online.
Yeah, and we'll look for that. And I'm hoping, I haven't heard yet, but I know I'm a finalist for the It Gets Better prize, which is $10,000 from the It Gets Better Foundation. If you saw, I don't know who's in charge of it now, but it was a campaign that Dan Savage had done for a while, which is the idea of reminding our queer youth that, like, if you can get to adulthood, like, please stay because it gets better. And so if that funding comes through, that's $10,000. There's one grant per state. So I'm really hoping that I get the one for Hawaii, so that could really help fund our program for a while.
And so if you want to share that link with us in the fall, when you get yours up and going, we'll be more than happy to share it out.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
Because what is it? One of the things that, this is sort of off topic, but since your school feeds into Campbell, is that correct?
Correct.
So for those who don't know, Campbell High School's marching band has been invited, their only school from Hawaii, to be for this 4th of July parade in Washington, D.C. They had a $300,000 promised donation, and $200,000 that went bye-bye. So we've been posting on our social media. We'll send something out to everybody to encourage that they have a GoFundMe account to help pay for that. So you see that. And so I guess I could say Pride at Work, which is where LGBT rights meets the labor movement, was able to successfully get $5,000 from the Hawaii AFL-CIO that will be going to them next week. So part of that's having them recognize that the labor community supports the students. And Ironworkers gave them $30,000 earlier. So and they had raised already $30,000. So they're on their way. They have to raise $200,000 between now and the end of the month. So yeah, because
And I will just add to that. I know it's a shameless plug, but almost every one of my GSA kids, we worked really hard in Campbell in the last 5 years to network the GSAs. My dream is that we see a GSA at every school and that the kids know where their safe spaces at every campus. It's harder to do at elementary school, but right now we have, at least on the Campbell side of the complex, Eva Mackay, Alima Intermediate, Dream House, Charter School, all have middle school GSAs, and then we feed into the Campbell High School GSA program. So that's the idea. And our last meeting of the year, we kind of introduce our 8th graders to the high school to know this is your classroom. Again, in my dream world, all classrooms are safe space, right? All of that. But we know that these kids need special supports to be able to make sure they know where their community is. And a lot of my students find solace in drama and band. And so knowing that these kids are in band and they want to go to DC, we were just devastated when we saw that funding fall through. Because also too, this is also the way that kids get to travel. I have a lot of students who've never been able to leave the island. So like having that opportunity to go to DC, especially, and I will say my students, my last batch of GSA kids who've moved on to Campbell were very political, and they'd like to be at our nation's capital and seeing how things work too. So super important to fundraise for that stuff when we can. So thank you for mentioning that, Chair.
Sure. Does anybody else have any other questions for Mili?
And I can take them offline too, like please, my information, yeah, Chair can share. And I'm just glad that this group is talking about this today, because I think sometimes, session's done, legislative session's done, like the work is done, and it's so not. And the work is 24/7. Obviously take naps, we all need them, but it's important to be talking about this stuff.
Well, since it appears everybody's being shy right now, we're gonna, on behalf of the Stonewall Caucus, we want to thank you for sharing your valuable time with us. Congratulations on the news. Can we say it now, even though we're being recorded?
So we'll see on that one. I just want to wait on that one, but I'm pretty sure I'll let you know by the end of the week.
Okay. End of next week.
Yeah. So we'll see on that one.
Like I'm already at, okay. So anyway, so anyway,
thank you so much for your time, and again, willing to support.
Oh, yes. Okay, on that note, we're going to end the recording. I'm not going to end the meeting.